No one could have predicted that an ordinary morning in front of a major building in the heart of Gangnam would suddenly turn into an emotional standoff between one of the calmest figures in the entertainment industry and a group of reporters who seemed intent on pushing boundaries with a question too sharp for an early hour. Because just as Suga of BTS stepped out of his car with a simple yet striking appearance, wearing a deep brown cap, a white face mask, and a long black coat that draped cleanly over his frame, dozens of cameras instantly fired off in unison from both the left and right like a volley of rapid gunshots. And even before his footsteps landed on the marble floor near the front entrance, one voice from the pack of reporters rose above the rest with a boldness that hung in the air. Min Yoongi, is it true you've canceled all your solo collaborations starting today? And what happened next wasn't a spoken answer or a cold smile like the ones he's known for, but rather, a sudden change in his expression that only the fastest cameras could capture, because in less than 2 seconds, his eyes, once calm and shaded beneath the brim of his cap, opened slightly wider and locked onto the direction of that voice, not with explosive anger but with a firmness that left no room for misinterpretation. He had heard it clearly and he didn't appreciate the way it was asked, and even his left hand, which had been holding the edge of his coat, curled slightly into a fist though. He remained composed, and the entire atmosphere shifted immediately. Fans who had been chanting his name fell silent. One of them audibly gasped and whispered, "Oh my God, is he mad?" Then another question came from the right, a female voice. "Does this have something to do with the rumors that you're stepping away from the spotlight?" But no response came, no glance to the right, only a silence that clung to the air like a thick fog on a cold morning. And Suga kept walking with a small bow toward the building staff as a polite gesture. But just before disappearing behind the glass doors, he paused for a moment and slightly raised his head. Not much, just enough for his sharp eyes to make contact again with the crowd of reporters, and a faint voice from one of his managers could be heard saying, "Don't press too hard, he's still recovering," a line that immediately made the press exchange confused glances because none of them had known he was recovering from anything. Recovering. From what exactly? Physical issues, mental strain, or something even deeper that had been carefully kept from the public eye. And that very question now hung heavy in the air like a weight that couldn't be dropped because that final glance from Suga before slipping inside the building wasn't the look of a pop star bothered by a nosy question. It was the look of someone who felt his boundary had been crossed without permission, and now everyone was beginning to wonder, was this really just about a question of collaborations, or was there something far bigger he was shielding behind that iceberg-like silence? Because as the glass door slowly closed behind him and the reflection of flashlights flickered for the last time against the polished surface, the energy outside did not dissolve as expected. Instead it grew heavier, almost tangible, with murmurs spreading like wildfire among the reporters who suddenly seemed unsure whether they had just captured a controversial scoop or accidentally stepped into a territory they weren't supposed to enter. And it was in that moment that someone from the back of the group, a junior reporter who had just joined the scene after running late, whispered loud enough to be caught on a nearby mic. Why did he look like that? That wasn't just irritation. And instantly a senior beside her snapped. You weren't here earlier. The whole vibe changed when he heard the question, while another added, he didn't just hear it, he absorbed it, like it meant something personal. And as this dialogue unfolded right there on the steps of the building, the camera crews were still rolling, trying to catch anything else that could justify the silence Suga had left behind. And somewhere in the chaos, one of the sound technicians zoomed in on the manager who had earlier muttered the words about recovery, catching his profile as he spoke in hushed tones to another staff member. I told them this wasn't a good day. And that sentence alone began to spawn dozens of interpretations because in the world of idols who are taught to mask everything behind smiles, any slip of real emotion becomes a puzzle the public obsesses over, and now Suga's unspoken reaction had turned into a mystery more gripping than any prepared press statement, and as fans online started dissecting the video frame by frame, zooming in on the slight twitch of his jaw, the pause in his steps, the unusual firmness in his gaze, one common thread began to emerge, that perhaps this wasn't just about protecting a secret but about defending a line that had already been crossed too many times, because in recent months, speculation had been growing over Suga's increasingly private demeanor, his reduced public appearances, and the subtle yet consistent distance he maintained even when with fellow members, and today's sharp moment felt like an eruption of all those fragments carefully buried under his calm persona. And when one fan posted a slowed-down clip with the caption, "He blinked twice right after that question. He does that only when he's trying not to react," the post went viral in less than an hour, dragging with it hundreds of comments like, "He's clearly holding something in," or "You can't tell me that wasn't personal." And as this digital investigation expanded, the original audio of the reporter's question began to be scrutinized too, with some netizens pointing out that the tone wasn't just inquisitive but laced with accusation, as if challenging his loyalty to the group. And that's when another clip emerged, from a different angle, showing a brief moment before Suga turned his head, his lips parting slightly as if about to say something, but he didn't, and it was that restraint, that decision to remain silent instead of lashing out, that added fuel to the theory that he was protecting something deeper, maybe even someone. And now the entire narrative had shifted from a routine media appearance to an unfolding enigma surrounding one of the most enigmatic artists in the world. Because just when people thought they knew Yoongi, he reminded everyone without a single word that silence, when chosen deliberately, can be the loudest noise in the room. And now all eyes were on the next possible sign, the next movement, the next crack in the surface that might reveal whether this was just a defensive moment or the prelude to something the industry never saw coming. And just when the buzz was starting to cool down outside, a single photo began circulating across fan pages and entertainment sites. Captured mid-second, raw and untouched, it showed Suga's eyes glinting beneath the shadow of his cap, sharp, unreadable, and locked onto the exact spot where the reporter had stood. And that one frame reignited everything, because it wasn't anger that people saw, it was something colder, something deeper, like the expression of a man who's exhausted from being questioned, dissected, and doubted every time he steps into the public light. And suddenly the silence he chose today felt less like mystery and more like a protest, a final shield against the noise that never ends. And the narrative flipped again, with fans fiercely defending his right to privacy while others speculated if the industry had simply pushed too far this time. And in the chaos of these divided opinions, no statement was released, no explanation came, and no confirmation followed, only the lingering impact of a moment so brief yet so loud that it refused to fade. And as reporters packed up and left with more questions than they arrived with, the air around the building still felt charged, heavy, unsettled, like something had shifted permanently. And behind that door, away from cameras, perhaps Suga finally exhaled, not because he was free from the spotlight but because for once, he had reminded the world that not all silence is weakness, and sometimes not answering is the only way to protect the truth.